Hey guys, and welcome back to my React course. This is part 3, and in this part we will get started with components in React. Every React application consists of one or more components which build up different parts of that app. For example, let's look at YouTube. We can divide this page into components like navigation bar, the actual video player, some functions such as like, share, and subscribe. On the left we have the playlist, and below that is the recommended videos. Each one of these components play an important part in making the YouTube website we see today. Now that you know what a component is, let's look at how to create one. So back at our project we created in part 1, we're going to create a new file in this project. So right-click the source folder and click New File. Let's name that file first component.js. Make sure it has .js or it will not work, because that is the default JavaScript file extension. So enter. The first thing we need to do is import React on the top. So import, capitalized R, React, from quotations, React all lowercase. And then function, the name of the file, first component, parenthesis, curly braces. Inside those curly braces, press enter, and then simply type return parenthesis. This will work perfectly when we test it, but you've probably noticed that typing all of this code each time you create a component can be time consuming, and there's a very helpful shortcut to that. So if you haven't installed the Visual Studio Code extensions I showed you in part 1, watch the video and install the extensions. Once you have it installed, we can delete all this code and simply type RFCE, enter. This will automatically create a new component for you, and the name will be set by default to the file name, which in this case is first component. So now, just create an h1 tag inside this component. So less than sign, h1, greater than sign. Inside that, you can type whatever you want. And for those of you who are not familiar with HTML tags, h1 stands for heading 1, which automatically has font styles made for headings, such as it being bold and the text size being big. So inside that heading, I'm going to type my first component. Now, back to the app.js file, we're going to use that component we just made. To do that, we first need to import it. So on the top right below the app.css, we're going to type import first component, as you can see the autocomplete, from any quotations. It can be single, double quotes, period, / first component autocomplete.js. You can even not include the .js if you like, because we only have one file named first component. And then instead of this hello world tag we created in part 1, we're going to use the component we just created. So delete this tag and type less than sign, first component, / greater than sign. As you can see, we're using this over here. Also, if you installed the extensions in part 1, you can simply type the name of the component as a tag, and it will automatically import it for you. So we can delete the import statement, and also delete this, and then just type less than sign first component. As you can see, it says auto import from first component. So enter, it automatically imports it. So that's just a quick helpful trick. Once you've done that, go to File, Save. Or the shortcut for that is Ctrl+S on Windows and Command+S on Mac. Next, open up the terminal by going to Terminal, then New Terminal. Simply type npm start. So npm space start, that will open up your browser on localhost. So in your browser, you can see the message you created in the component. Now go back to app.js and simply copy this line where we use the component and just paste it a few times. As you can see right away, it's gonna give us an error. It says it must have one parent element. So because in React, we're not allowed to use a component multiple times without a parent element, or not even just one component. We're not allowed to use more than one component without a parent element. So we're just gonna add a div tag. So just think of this as a container we need. And one of the most commonly used tags for containers are the div tags. So before the usage of the component, we type div and then leave the starting div and then the closing tag after. And now we'll take away all the errors. And when you save it, as you can see, it gets reformatted. And now it is way easier to read. This is because of an extension we installed called Prettier. Its job is to simply reformat our code once saved. And as you can see, that works perfectly. It also doesn't give us an error now, so that's good. If we open up our browser again, we can see the same message written multiple times based on how many times we repeated that tag. The next thing we're going to talk about are the types of components. Now, there are many types of components in React, but the two easiest ones that we're going to learn are functional components and class components. In simple terms, class components use the built-in state object to store property values that belong to the component. On the other hand, functional components are what we call a stateless component because it does not use the state object to store properties. I'm going to show you examples of both. Now, until right now, the components we've seen and created are all functional components. So function, because they're just simpler to use and set up, but we can convert them to class components anytime we want. So below all of this, if we just type CC and click enter, as you can see, it says class component, the simple React snippets, which is one of the extensions we installed. So enter, as you can see, it creates a class component. It just sets up the template for creating a class component. All you need to do is just type the name of the components. So first component. And then now we can just copy these tags, paste them over here. After that, we can just delete the old one. And also there's two export statements, just like that. So from now on, we're going to start using class components. But don't worry, we're going to come back to the functional components later in this series because sometimes you're making a simple component and it's just unnecessary to create a class component. Now, let's change the message inside the heading tag to something like this. Counter, :1, for example. As I said, the state object you see up here is used to store properties that belong to this component. So in the state object, create a new item called count. So enter count, and then set that to 1. Make sure to use colons and not the equal sign or it won't work. Now, let's say we're making a website that uses online shopping and the items in the inventory need a counter. But for now, we're not going to focus on the buttons used to add and remove items, but instead simply add and subtract the values ourselves by directly using the state object. When you're building a big application, the chances of using this method are really low because there are better and more efficient ways to handle this. So back to the heading tag, instead of writing the number directly, we're going to write it dynamically. So delete the 1 and instead insert the curly braces. And inside those braces, type this.state.count. Let me just go through this quickly. This refers to the whole component. So inside this component, inside the state, get the value of the count item. As you can see, when you highlight this, the state gets highlighted, the count gets highlighted. So we're going inside the component, inside the state, we're grabbing the value of this item or this property. This will dynamically show the value of the count property in our state, When we save the file and go to the browser, we can see an error. So it says component is not defined, of course, because we didn't import it. We need to go back to the component, and right next to React in the import statement, we type comma, curly braces, component. Now we can go back to the browser and we can see the number 1, counter equals 1. But if we go back to VS Code and change the count value, so to, let's say, 4, we can see the heading being changed accordingly. So that'll be it for this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, like this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.